Hey everybody, welcome to a very, very special episode of Carnival of Randomness, and I'm just going to refer to our master as Dr. Zoom because I don't want to confuse anything with our guests, but this is, take note, the day in history, because first podcast of May, yes, but this is our first annual Chascast, and I'm turning the hosting duties over to our great Chaz Lockwood, so could you introduce our guest, and I'm stuttering.
Introduce our desk.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to introduce my good friend, and he is a good friend. And he is an indie musician, a music journalist, and a compiler of music reissues. And it was imperative to get him on this show because this show has been devoted to people with, mostly people with Rochester connections who know about the music scene. And we've always been sort of beating around the bush, and it would not be right to not have Mr. Pat Thomas on one of these podcasts to fill in some blanks and also tell us about his fascinating meandering and creative endeavors. So that's why he's here with us today.
Yeah, well, I have strong Rochester connections. I lived there in the early to mid 80s. I worked at Kodak for several years, but most importantly, I was the drummer and manager of a band called Absolute Gray that played Scorgies dozens of times and Shotsies and all those clubs. I also did a little DJing on WITR and WRUR. So yeah, I have strong roots in Rochester. Used to shop at the Record Archive. Probably bought the first 200 albums I ever bought. Most of them probably
On Mount Hope, right?
Yeah.
I remember going in there to get. You went to concerts there ever probably too because they used to have bands in the back and.
Yeah.
And I remember getting Kinks tickets there to go see them at U of R and always stopping down there. And I think there was one out, Chaz. I remember there's one article you told me about. They said like the only bands somebody was writing, it was some far off thing about the only bands that mattered from Scorgies were New Math and Absolute Gray.
Wow.
That's not.
Remember that was years ago. I can't remember. That was like decades ago.
Hold on a second. Keep that going, and I'll comment. I just gotta do one little tweak here.
Okay. Well, the thing about Absolute Gray, we had sort of an REM sound with a female singer, Beth Brown, who'd earlier been in a Rochester band called Hit and Run. That was on one of those. What's the big Rochester rock radio station?
Did you say CMF?
CMF? Yeah, CMF, right. So WCMF used to put out these compilations of local bands. And so Hit and Run was on one of those compilations, Anyway, we played Scorgies a lot, and we put out a couple of albums. We recorded 2 albums at Dave Anderson's Saxon Studios. One of the albums was sort of co-produced with Bob Martin of Personal Effects. The second album was produced by this guy, Tim Lee, who'd been in this Southern band called the Windbreakers with Mitch Easter. And we opened for the Dream Syndicate and the Rain Parade and the Long Riders at 3 o'clock. So we had strong sort of connections to the Paisley Underground on the West Coast, which is probably why I'm on the West Coast right now. I wound up moving to San Francisco in 1987, and I started a record company called Heyday Records, and I put out solo albums from Stephen Roback of the Rain Parade, Chris Kakovich, and Jack Waters from Green on Red, a woman named Barbara Manning. So I've basically been in the music business sort of full-time, nonstop for, I don't know, the better part of 35 years now at this point.
I've always found it to be a bit of a dichotomy in Rochester where you have like the two things. We have the indie underground people, and then you have the other popular people where it's all those bands like REO Speedwagon, Journey, all these.
Right.
Never the twain shall meet. One of my friends was opening for an Eagles cover band last year. I remember like people I knew, I left after she played, and then they all showed up people I knew afterwards.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I remember WCMF had 1 or 2 hours a week of sort of underground radio on like maybe a Sunday night with Roger, who was the black DJ.
Uncle Roger, yeah.
Uncle Roger. And then it was also hosted sometimes, I feel like it might have been co-hosted by Kevin Patrick of New Math before he moved to New York City.
Yeah, Uncle Raj and Kevin were teamed up. I know that.
Right. But yeah, the main thing that was great about Rochester in the 80s to be an indie band is both WRUR and WITR played almost nothing but indie rock back then. And then you had other things like, Mick Elber's Psychedelic Sunday, right? And you had other DJs doing sort of garage rock stuff. But Rochester was kind of a vibrant music scene in the 80s. Obviously you had Chesterfield Kings, and you had a whole bunch of bands, really.
And we still have Mike Murray doing his garage show. And
right. I think he started off with Mick.
Yeah, Mike's great. Mike's more of like, I think he fashions himself kind of like an AM radio 60s guy instead of a mellow 70s guy. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's the whole vibe with him, like his show. It's the pop culture too. Everything's like 1960s cheesy pop culture and garage, and he gives the whole environment. I mean, if you know what it is.
But the other thing about Rochester in the 80s, you had the old Village Green bookstore that had like hundreds of magazines. I could get The Enemy or Melody Maker there, Trouser Press. I
used to get one called Option and one called Bucket Full of Brains.
Yeah, yep. Those were floating around. And there were other record stores too. There was the Monroe Ave. Was it Record Time?
That one I don't remember.
That was in Pittsford.
Well, that was in Pittsford, but there was one right. But there was one in that sort of little strip of Monroe Ave, closer to downtown, that has a couple of stores.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm kind of blanking on it.
And the Bap Shop, to say it. The
Bop Shop, and there was back then Lakeshore Record Exchange.
Oh yeah.
And they had tons of, because I was also a prog fan. They had tons of imported 70s prog albums.
Ron Stein, I think that was his name, the owner.
Ron Stein.
He moved to Texas, and he was great. We would go in. I went to Mooney, and we would go down there after class on Fridays and just say, "What do you got for us?"
Yeah.
And he would turn us on into all kinds of things. I guess he knew King Diamond really well. I guess he's a neighbor of his in Texas now.
He carried a lot of imported heavy metal stuff, which wasn't my bag, but he also got a lot of prog stuff. And his wife, if he wasn't working the front counter, his wife was. I used to sit around, talk to her and him for hours. They were both very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and he just loved music. That's where I got my first Zombies album.
Yeah. Yep.
And remember, it was like word of mouth back then, too, because we didn't just have all this stuff. So you asked a friend, what do you listen to? What are you into? He's like, try this. Then you would just go around. It's like almost like sort of like cognitive knowledge in the old days, where it's like from tribes, where all of a sudden some band comes out, it, somebody else knows it, and it's all around, because we weren't just listening to the popular stuff.
Well, I actually, since we're going down memory lane, I really have to acknowledge Stan Merrill, or Stan the Man.
I saw Stan the Man a couple days ago.
Now, Stan the Man was the first person to tell any of us about Big Star and Alex Chilton. He was the first person to tell us about Chris Stamey and Peter Holsapple and the DBs. He was the first person who knew who Mitch Easter was. He really, Stan had a big influence on my indie rock tastes for about 2 years, for sure.
I used to call him the high priest of rock here.
Yeah.
Because he was like Viv Stanfield for me. He got me into that.
Yeah, sure.
And it hurt him a lot when Alex died, when Alex Chilton passed away. I was talking to him, and he said that one hurt. I remember he saw him at Scourges and stuff. That one, because I'm a huge Big Star fan. I just keep listening to them all the time. One of my friends just did a cover of "I'm in Love with a Girl" late last year.
Because we all wanted to open for Chilton, we all did it together. We had like a little super group. It was Absolute Grey blended with Invisible Party. And we all took turns singing and playing instruments, and then of course Chaz infamously got on stage and played bass with Chilton on, I think it was Kiss of Me.
Let's confirm that with him. Does he remember this though at the time?
Yeah, let's see if he remembers it.
Chaz,
Hey,
did you play bass with Alex Chilton on stage?
Oh man, that was the highlight of my life. That was the zenith of everything, because we had a cult following with him. He's like this. For people who don't know, he's like this Southern kind of Brian Wilson pop composer, power pop guy, and he's a legend. And he's very iconoclastic and weird, but he does very poppy underground stuff. And they got a big cult following, so I was part of it. And thanks to Stan, actually, who has no shame in sort of working on people. Said, yeah, we do a cover of one of your songs, and you should talk to Chaz. He'll get up and play it with you. So at the end of the concert, he invited me up on stage. I borrowed Mitch Razor's bass, actually.
Right, yeah.
And there's a tape of it on the internet archive, and it's great because it's all the regular people, all our friends, and they're going wild. And the cool thing about it is he stops the song in the middle of the song, not to reprimand me, but just to tell me how he wants me to turn up the bass and play it a little differently. And everybody's going wild. It was so much fun.
That was the most fun we could have and still keep our clothes on.
It was. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I'm still shocked. Like these days, I'll go shopping and I'll hear a Ramones song playing in the background while I'm at Wegmans.
Yeah, times have changed, man. In the 80s, you wouldn't have heard anything like that in a Wegmans.
So, but Pat's band, Absolute Gray, I'm not calling it Pat's band, but was very Velvet's, and then some of his bandmates were throwing in influences from like I don't know, Echo and the Bunnymen and the Smiths. If you don't mind me making these comparisons.
No, it's totally accurate, man.
But then fast forward to the 90s, and I'm getting CDs from Pat from Yes, a prog band. So I was just looking on your Wikipedia entry. You have a buttload of Mushroom, way more than I thought. Mushroom releases.
Yeah, when I in the 90s, when I moved to San Francisco, I started a sort of a psychedelic instrumental band called Mushroom. It's like a little bit of Pink Floyd and Soft Machine, a little bit of krautrock like Can and Faust, and we wound up getting kind of minorly popular. We toured Germany. We opened for the krautrock band Faust. We did a show with Kevin Ayers of Soft Machine as our lead singer. We did a couple albums with David Allen of Gong. And it's kind of trippy, kind of like music to smoke pot to, I guess, for lack of a better word. If
you could pick out a favorite one or a starter CD, what would, just off the top of your head, what?
Well, Mushrooms, we have an album called Analog Hi-Fi Surprise that you can listen to on Bandcamp. I think that might be one of our best albums. Another popular album for us is called Foxy Music. That's also on Bandcamp. So just go to Bandcamp and put in Mushroom, Foxy Music, or Mushroom Analog Hi-Fi Surprise, and you can listen to this stuff for free. And then you can download it if you like it.
Cool. Maybe we'll play a song by that at the end just to advertise it.
Please, yeah.
We'll talk about it at the end. But I saw Tony Levin's Stickmen play a couple weeks ago. And he's fantastic. Yeah. But I can do the whole lyrics for his song Tentacles.
Oh, boom, wow.
Boom, boom. Okay. Yeah, I'll do them all. Tentacles. That's it.
I'm a big King Crimson guy. I saw Tony Levin with King Crimson many times. I saw the Discipline tour and the Beat tour back in the 80s. And then I saw him, since then.
He goes back with me a long time because the first time I saw him was Peter Gabriel's Security tour, and I was telling him a couple weeks ago, Tony, we haven't aged a day, but this was like 40 years ago. And I'm like, who's this bald bass dude? So.
Right, yeah, I saw that Security tour. It came to.
So at the War Memorial.
War Memorial.
Yep. And I remember the opening band, they were like banging on trash cans and stuff. Peter Gabriel came out and
Yeah.
introduced them.
Yeah, I was at that show.
Yeah, that was really cool. And I remember that was like, I think, the first album Peter Gabriel bothered to name because I think the record company kept nagging him so much.
That's exactly right. Yeah, they were like...
Wasn't it Peter Gabriel, then he finally named the one with games, he named it Security.
Yeah, he did 3 albums that were self-titled in a row.
Yep.
Yeah. God bless him.
It was like what the Raindrops album or the Windrift album, the Melting Face album, and the
exactly. Right.
I always have the best. I tell everybody. I told Tony this story. My friend Sammy does security, and he did it like for Darien Lake, but he did it at the War Memorial. When Peter Gabriel played time ago, he likes to go biking. So Sammy is security. He's going with them. He's jogging with them. And he's thinking, okay, it's the job. I got to do it. He keeps up with them the whole way around the city. They get in that little garage. He's dying. Like, Peter Gabriel's laughing, and he's looking at Peter Gabriel. He's like, what are you laughing about? And he goes, first, on this tour, you're the first one who made it the whole way.
Wow, that's great.
Tony Levin goes, yeah, that was a funny story.
I like Peter Gabriel stuff, but I even more than him, I like Television, who opened for Peter Gabriel in Rochester, and I heard they got booed during their set.
Didn't they play it like the Red Creek or something?
Yeah, but Pat's reissued. Which Television record did you reissue?
I reissued Marquee Moon and Adventure.
One of my favorites.
180 gram vinyl. Got to talk to Verlaine a few times on the phone. He was friendly and cranky at the same time.
Yeah, it sounds like him.
Yeah. He's one of the most underrated guitarists, I think. I think he's just awesome.
Yeah.
Sore spot. Richard Lloyd's concert at Abilene got COVIDed.
Oh, did it? Oh, that's too bad.
I called that the year of concert refunds because I would check my email. It would be Nick Cave refund, Abilene refund.
Yeah. Right. Yep.
Can't imagine a lot of bookers just threw themselves off of buildings that year.
Yeah, no, it was not a good not a good time financially for any of us.
Yeah. It's one little thing out of a million.
So Chaz, what else can we explore about my days of my Rochester connections, or anything else you want to dive into?
Well, we hung out a lot. We were sort of dorky guys, but cool. We were well liked, but we had some wild friends. Mm-hmm. We had our friend John, who was like an infant terrible. How do you pronounce it?
Yes.
And he was always getting high and doing insane things.
Yes. True.
Taking LSD and going in the subway. The abandoned subway.
Oh yeah, the underground tunnels in Rochester.
Showing up at doing performance art, like naked in a plexiglass box, and
yeah, he was at the Pyramid Arts Center. He was at the Pyramid Arts Center, which is the Pyramid still around? Does anybody know?
I don't know if it might be in some form somewhere.
Oh, okay. Well, John was wearing a trench coat, and he threw open the trench coat, and he was naked, but he had a stuffed animal tied around his waist to cover his private parts.
That's the beauty of being on the scene, though. I think there were 2 types. One type really, really lived it, and then there were those of us who just really, really liked the music.
Yes, true.
Yeah. But you were saying, you made that post about U2. I guess one college here, they didn't want to pay them an extra $300, like around 1986. They got some local band instead, but they could have had U2.
Yeah, no, U2 played at RIT, and it would have been 1983, 82 or 83. The War album had just come out, and even though New Year's Day was a little bit of a minor hit, they were still kind of an underground band. They were only playing to like 2,000-3,000 people at that point, and they hadn't really crossed over to WCMF. They were very much a college radio band, and like them or not, they really, back then, to see them in a small place, they really blew the roof off of that place. Anytime you can get a stadium rocker playing in a small venue, it's going to be great.
Friends saw Nirvana and Geneseo. I guess there were under 30 people there.
Wow. Yep. Yep.
And you remember before, like any band, Beatles, Stones, even everybody, they were nothing yet before, for a while, they were nobody anybody heard of at one time. It wasn't like they
there's a couple of
in.
bands that played around in our scene in Rochester that were, I called them like proto grunge. They were almost like a lot like Nirvana, but they never had a big fancy recording contract. There was a band called the Strip Miners.
Yes.
And a band called Agit Pop from Albany who would come by.
Yeah.
And
I remember
they were really close to that, I think. And it was maybe a couple years,
a
year or two before Nirvana. Nirvana had a lot of money behind them. They were David Geffen.
Yep, that's
not
true.
to put them down, but
yep.
Did they get a lot? I mean, I'm probably wrong, but some of those bands I always got the feeling they were influenced a lot by the Pixies, just with that soft and loud sound.
Totally influenced by the Pixies. And the Pixies got it from some friends of mine called the Dream Syndicate. If you listen to the first Dream Syndicate album called Days of Wine and Roses, they totally do the soft, loud thing. The Pixies heard that. The Pixies obviously became more popular, and then all the grunge bands got it from the Pixies.
The Pixies were totally cool. I didn't know all their material as much as, our friend Linnea De Palma, in playing with Jim, she taught me how to play Gigantic. It was one of the early songs. But that turned me on to them. But they were from up here in Boston, and I remember reading interviews with them. They were like they hated the yuppies. They were like, weirdos, like freaks. And they're like, we don't like the yuppies and their sports bars and their chicken wings. Screw them. They're really smart people, I can tell.
Kim Deal really knew how to make friends the last time they had a Pixies reunion they played here at the Armory. Because she goes on about, we played in Toronto, and I knew where that was, and I heard we were going to Rochester. I don't remember if we played there or where the heck that town even was.
Yeah, I was Chaz was in a fantastic band in the 80s called Invisible Party with Jim Huey on drums and Stan the Man as the lead singer, a few other characters, and they only put out a 7-inch single called Big Man's Daughter, and I can't remember what the B-side was, but really fantastic. And then they sort of splintered into two bands. One was Lotus STP, that was Stan and Chaz, and the other one was the Ferrets, which was Jim and Chaz. And those bands had their own highs and lows, but Invisible Party was like really, me and Beth of Absolute Grey were huge Invisible Party fans.
I remember seeing Lotus at, I think it was a reunion at Richmond's.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that one. And also, I think for the Badnoffs, I think I would put them up there in terms of wacky song titles with the best of them.
Yeah, the Badnoffs song titles were probably one of their strongest suits, for sure.
Yeah, you want a Dead Pope in the Road?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go on. What have you done now? We're talking local, now non-local. You have a big resume.
Non-local, about 20 years ago, I was involved with a reissue vinyl label called For Men with Beards. And we did Television Marquee Moon, Television Adventure. We put the PIL, Public Image Limited, in the metal box. It had never come out in the metal box. And then after that, I started working for a very cool label out of Seattle called Light in the Attic Records. And Light in the Attic is responsible for... We reissued all the Rocky Erickson solo albums, and I wasn't involved in this, but they put out this woman, Betty Davis, who was married to Miles Davis, kind of.
Oh, hell yeah.
I've
Crazy.
seen a lot of her movies.
Yeah, right.
Didn't she just die?
She just passed away. Yep.
Yeah.
But Light in the Attic was one of the premier sort of reissue labels. We did this great album called UFO by Jim Sullivan, who was this weird singer-songwriter who disappeared in the desert. I put out through them Public Image Limited's first edition album, which had never come out in the United States.
Yeah, there's a picture of you posing with John Lydon, and let me tell you, whatever you think of him, he's up there and probably 50 most influential artists of the 21st century.
Well, Lydon did something that most people have never done. And I say this, and I'm not even a big Lydon fan, but I always give people respect where they deserve it. He did two super influential records. One is, of course, the Sex Pistols debut, and the other one is that second Pill album known as Second Edition or Metal Box. And what's interesting about them is they're two totally different records. It's like the difference between the Who's My Generation and Who's Next or something. I mean, obviously, Lydon is the only common connection between his two bands, but nevertheless, most artists cannot do a full 180-degree genre turnaround. I mean, Bowie was great at it. I mean, compare Heroes to Ziggy Stardust. It's like two totally different artists. You know, I love people who can do that.
And I also love that I don't care idea where I'm going to do wherever my muse takes me. I'm not going to put out something because it's going to be popular. I want to try soul. I want to try something else. I hope some people like it. If they don't, well, this is what I want to do. I have to be true to myself as an artist.
Yeah, Bowie was the master of that. You know, there's other people. I mean, arguably you could throw Neil Young or Dylan in there, but those guys have never done big genre switch arounds except for maybe Trans and Landing on Water.
You know, Pat, you don't be humble, but Pat has bragging rights to be able to say he put out a even reissued a super rare Dylan track on a
okay, we can talk
compilation.
About that. So I moved to Oakland around 1999, and I started hanging out with former members of the Black Panther Party, and I started interviewing them about the 1960s and 70s, about their struggles against Richard Nixon and J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI. And I started to realize that there was an incredible music scene kind of influenced by and surrounded by the Panthers. There were obviously soul bands. But there was also this Black Panther known as George Jackson. It's kind of a long story who he was, but he was murdered in prison by prison guards in 1971. And so Dylan, this is in the days where you could, just like Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young did with the song Ohio, you could record a song one week and have it in the stores and on the radio stations a week later, like protest songs. So he wrote this song called George Jackson, protest song about the murder of George Jackson. And for all the millions of Dylan box sets, best ofs, compilations, rarity compilations, it had never been on anything. So when I did my Black Panther book, I did a companion soundtrack CD. The book is called Listen Whitey, The Sights and Sounds of Black Power. And Dylan gave me permission to use a Dylan track, and he barely charged me anything to use it. So that was...
I've never heard that, but I'm imagine it starts out, this is the story of the George Jackson.
You stole my line.
Yeah. It's kind of a different song than Hurricane, but yes, I hear you.
Yeah, did you do a book on Abby Hoffman, or am I completely wrong?
No, I did a book about Abby Hoffman.
I don't do any research on this show, so...
Well, it's all right. We can talk about that. So I was a big fan of Abby Hoffman and the Yippies, and he had a kind of a partner named Jerry Rubin.
Yeah.
They were sort of like the Lennon and McCartney of the protest movement. So I did an oral history. I interviewed 100 people that knew Jerry and Abby. And although the book is sort of focused on Jerry, there's tons of Abby Hoffman in there. There's pictures and people talking about him. And I just love this sort of counterculture political protest side of the 60s. So that's like the Black Panthers, the Yippies, Phil Oakes, Allen Ginsberg, John Sinclair, and the MC5.
The Merry Pranksters.
Merry Pranksters, the Fugs, all those crazy nutbags. Some of these guys have become my friends, and some of them I've hung out with. And so in my book, I interviewed John Sinclair, and I talked briefly to Ed Sanders of the Fugs and all those folks.
East Village Freaks, baby. Right?
East Village Freaks, right. In fact, my next book is a big book about Allen Ginsberg's association with all these freakazoids. So yeah, I'm sort of a counterculture historian, for lack of a better word. That's
We missed Abby Hoffman. He was supposed to speak at our school, and I think he passed away like a week beforehand. So we were all stealing the posters all over. And I thought he would love that act of us stealing the posters.
Oh, he would love that.
So what do we get? The one person I run into who did show up was G. Gordon Liddy.
Oh wow!
There's a point.
He taught a class. He taught like a poli-sci class.
You know what's funny though? I want to ask Pat if he agrees with me about this East Village thing, because I don't know it like he does, but I have pretty good
instincts.
Instincts, yeah. So there was a folk scene there that Dylan came out of that was sort of proper. It had like Dave Van Ronk and some like folk Bach purists that were going back and they were taping people down south, and they were almost like archivists. And then there was Joan Baez, and they were kind of respectable. But then these, what we call the freaks, they were they didn't give a shit. They were more like Frank Zappa kind of people, and I think he actually ripped a lot of those guys off.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not as cool as they are. What do you think about that, Pat?
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with you for sure. Yeah.
I think something that's relevant till today would be from the Village Voice. I think the Village Voice, I might be wrong, when Mailer and Jimmy Breslin said politicians should settle arguments by jousting in Central Park.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be really good today.
Well, the Village Voice is a key part of this whole scene that we're talking about. People also forget that Norman Mailer really loved the Yippies. He loved Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin. There was basically, you had sort of old school lefties like Mailer sort of cavorting with young upstarts like Jerry Rubin. And it was really an interesting time in New York City from roughly, this kind of starts bubbling around 66, 67 and goes to about 1972. It all kind of crashes down when Nixon gets reelected. But, a lot of people forget that, John Lennon and Yoko Ono immersed themselves in the scene. They moved to New York City in 1971. They immediately become friends with Jerry Rubin. They obviously write that song about John Sinclair. And the main reason that the government was trying to get Lennon
deported, wasn't it?
Deported was because he was going to lead a whole anti-Nixon campaign, right? It was kind of disappointing that Lennon later sort of what's the word? He sort of distanced himself from that, or he sort of pretended like he never did it or something.
He's a complex guy. I always thought.
He's a very complex guy.
Just to say the least. And I think it would depend if you met him, what day you met him on, too. It's like the one story I like to tell people. I have like this little bag of them. I remember my brother had a friend. He had Lennon sign an album, and he didn't look at it. And he went and looked at it and went home. He signed it Paul McCartney.
Oh, did he really? I love that. I mean, the humor of Lennon. In fact, here's one of my favorite quotes about those guys. This quote is from Ray Davies. He said, Paul McCartney was the most competitive person I ever met. He goes, John Lennon wasn't competitive. He just thought everyone else was crap.
I love the one Rolling Stone interview with him when they go through Beatles songs. He's like, this is shit. This is like, I hate this song. I hate this song.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great.
You know what? I think that was the point. Like some of the stuff
is Lennon remembers those interviews.
That's what it came from.
That's what he's talking about. Yeah.
And I also think when you look at, if you as an artist, even like on this show, when I look back at the first shows till now, sometimes you might look back and go, I really dug this stuff, but sometimes you might just cringe at your learning curve when you started out.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's exactly right. Our musical taste is often like that. I mean, some people started with Styx and Journey albums, and then the next thing you know, they're listening to REM and the Dream Syndicate, And
I think also I notice a lot of my friends who are musicians, they come from musical families, and a lot of us, I got into, everybody was listening to that kind of stuff at school, and I went to suburban Catholic schools, so you could figure out the tape for the most part, and how I remember making a gun club tape for somebody, and he'd go, Rob, this sucks. Why don't you listen to some good music like Journey? But I got into it because my brother was in New Math, so I got all this stuff. because of that. Otherwise, I never would have. I would have been a robot too, probably.
Oh, your brother was a new math?
Yeah, he was a keyboard player, Mark Schwartz.
Oh, okay.
So I knew. That's why I know all these Scorgy things and everything else. This is why I was listening to all this stuff, because I heard it around the house when I was a kid.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolute Gray's first gig at Scorgy's was, or one of our first, was opening for New Math. Yeah.
Still, one of the best stories about them is they opened for Cheap Trick at the Penny Arcade, and they got bottles thrown at them.
Wow.
Oh, brother,
was your brother also in Jet Black Barry?
Yes, and I guess the reason for the name change, and I actually asked them this, they said because they were going more, and I think I always used to say they were a bit like Eddie and the Hot Rods and stuff when they started. But they're getting, with those other albums with Gardens and Sundown on Venus, they were getting more psychedelic, and they were thinking, okay, it doesn't really fit the name, so let's change the name.
Yeah,
they're huge Rocky fans too.
I was going to say, I probably own those albums you had, those reissues. Yeah. I'm a huge Rocky fan.
Yeah, these are like the albums produced by by Stu Cook from Creedence Clearwater. The Evil One, and Don't Slander Me, and all that stuff.
So why did Rocky call it Rocky's Crazy? Let's all agree, but so it wasn't just Rocky and the aliens; it was Rocky and the Believe aliens.
Yeah.
For reasons I'd have to find out. I don't know what that even means.
The one thing he never did is he never became Rocky Erickson UK. That he didn't do.
What was his description of Starry Eyes too? It was like a Buddy Holly song if Buddy Holly was on acid or something. It was that's not the wrong quote. It's something like that, like on Laudanum or something.
Someone told me this Rocky story where sometime in like the 80s, they go to like a record store, in-store that Rocky's doing, and Rocky's wearing these really cool sunglasses. And my buddy goes, "Hey, those are cool sunglasses." Rocky goes, "Yeah, they're made of human skin."
That sounds about right.
I can't top that, but I had a friend approach him in Baltimore when he played at a club. And he looked kind of like burned out and out of it. And my friend said, "Rocky, do you know what time it is?" And Rocky, without missing a beat, he said, "Time is now." He said,
"Not lying." The logic of that's perfect.
That's true. That's true.
My favorite is The Interpreter by Rocky.
My favorite is the 7-inch single of Don't Slander Me. Is a totally different version than the one that's on the album. The album version is not nearly as interesting.
Yeah. I heard that. I think I was hanging out with John Armstrong, actually, and Willie, and they played it, and I was like, holy shit, this is great. It's like Beatnik. It was greasier. It was.
It is. It's way greasier and a little less pseudo metal. Yeah.
It was like finger snapping Beatnik, like what the bad people in Batman would listen to, the Girls in Tights.
That's a great review of it. That's awesome. There's one, I don't know if you put it out, somebody's called Don't Knock the Rock, and it's almost like some guy's hanging out in the studio and just doing ad-libbing 50 songs.
Oh, wow. No, I haven't heard that one.
Then he does one song called Haunted House where all it says is, typical Rocky, this house is haunted, this house is haunted. That's it. But he does Angel Baby, and you could tell, like, if you listen to it, that'd be like, if bands are warming up and they goof around, it's like somebody put a tape on while they were just jamming through these. It's very sloppy. It's, like, just fun to hear. He's out of tune, but it's Rocky. What are you going to do?
Bootlegs, my baby. Bootlegs.
I don't know. Ian McLaughlin got me on that one when I had him sign a CD. When he looked at it, he goes, "The heck is this?" First he goes, "What's your name?" "Rob." "I had a manager named Rob. He ripped me off." But then he looks at it and he goes, "I think this is a bootleg. I'll sign it anyways."
Was that like a Faces bootleg or something?
It was a Faces. It was a German record. And he's, "Where'd you get this?" And I pointed over to Tom Cohen. I'm like, "I got it at his store. Don't blame me."
Yeah. Wow.
Ian was great. I miss him. Bless him. I felt like my friend Greg Townsend, they were touring. He's with Nick Lowe and Low Straight Chicks. Ian was going to open. Told me the story. They were in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Ian didn't show up, and it was like, okay, Ian always shows up. And they found out he had a heart attack going to the plane. Passed away.
Wow. Yeah.
And I got to know him. He was awesome because I would he's shopping in the Bop Shop, and I asked him. I said, "Can I confirm a story to you?" Rod Stewart said that the Faces were the first band to get kicked out of Holiday Inn, and then you lied getting back in. You called yourself Fleetwood Mac and the Grateful Dead, and then they got kicked out. And he goes, "Rod doesn't know what he's talking about." He said, "What we used to do is we got kicked out." He said, "Well, I threw stuff out the window. We used to register as family." Because they were on the same label. Then they kicked them out.
Oh, wow. Wow.
But I love that, the first hand, just getting able to meet somebody like that. Just
Oh, yeah. No, I'm a huge fan. And then later he played with the Stones. He's on the Some Girls tour.
And he did. You hear the story about Dylan and him? I guess when he played with Dylan, he said that don't be nervous if Bob stares at you because he's really nearsighted.
Yep. That's actually a great band. That's Mac from the Faces and Mick Taylor and Dylan. That's a great combo, man.
Yeah. Yeah, go on, Chiz.
Pat, did you go to South by Southwest with Dream Syndicate?
I did. One of my current jobs, if you will, I'm now the manager of a band called the Dream Syndicate that's been around on and off since the 80s, led by Steve Wynn. And so we went to South by Southwest last month, and they played 5 shows in 2 days, and we had a great time. And then there's a band called the Continental Drifters that includes Mark Walton from the Dream Syndicate, but it's got Vicky Peterson of the Bangles and Susan Cowsill and Peter Holsapple of the DBs. It's kind of like a super group. So
they sound like they're cool, nice people too. I assume.
Yeah, and they have the Continental Drifters. From that lineup, you think of the DBs and the Bangles being pop. It's more like Delaney and Bonnie and Friends or Joe Cocker's Mad Dogs and Englishmen. It's kind of like real soulful, gritty, swamp rock. Very cool. Yeah.
It's one thing I like on the local scene, being being involved with it, is a lot of these younger kids. You talk to them, they're influenced by what we're talking about. They're really like scholars of music. They love Neil Young, like things we're talking about. They would know.
Sure.
Like one band called Danger Bird. They do this one song, "Roll Away." I said, "This is like the best song Neil Young wrote that he doesn't know he wrote."
I hate to break this to you, but I think Pat's met Crazy Horse too.
Well, yeah, this is kind of a funny story. So I can't remember the exact date, but towards the end of the 80s, Neil Young didn't use Crazy Horse for about 3 or 4 years. And so Ralph Molina and Billy Talbot were getting bored and itchy. And so they called Matt Pucci from the Rain Parade. And they started a version of Crazy Horse with those 3 guys. And they did an album for me. I had a record company I mentioned earlier called Heyday Records. And so they did an album, and I met Billy a bunch of times, and very, very interesting dudes. I mean, the thing about these guys is, they become famous when they're like 18 or 19, and with Neil, of course, and so they, they're kind of in their own world, and their world is, getting high a lot. Everybody's always doped up, but friendly, approachable dudes.
It's funny. We both are all fans of Robin Lane, who's a emeritus rocker up here, and she was talking about. She knows them too.
Yeah, well,
she didn't like them. She thought they were very unpolished and called them almost like punk. Like in 67, 68.
Right. Well, that was what made Crazy Horse kind of cool. It was sort of unpolished. I mean, what Neil was doing with Crosby, Stills and Nash was very polished, and then what he was doing with Crazy Horse was sort of almost punk rock. And I think, Neil's music is like that. It's either really soft, acoustic-y, like the Harvest album, or it's total balls to the wall, like Reactor.
Yeah, Ragged Glory I'm thinking of a lot too.
Yeah, Ragged Glory,
and everything.
I saw the Ragged Glory tour. That was great.
I love that. I love that album.
Yeah.
But I think also
in the remaining time, I got to hear a little bit more about the Dream Syndicate. I've heard a track off the new album, and to me, it sounds almost like shoegazy.
Well,
one of the tracks I heard.
One of the things about Steve Wynn and this is both admirable and sometimes less admirable, is, he's rarely deviated from his basic path of sort of, Crazy Horse, Velvet Underground stuff. And so I love the fact that all these years later, with the Dream Syndicate, he's now not using Crazy Horse and Velvet Underground as a template. There's elements of I hear elements of Roxy Music, maybe a little Steely Dan. There's some krautrock in there, and so I love the fact that the new Dream Syndicate album doesn't sound anything like any of the albums.
It's got completely different textures.
Right, exactly, and shows a real growth and maturity on his part and the entire band, frankly.
Actually, you brought something to mind, too, when you talked about Neil Young and Crazy Horse. I sometimes like the dichotomy of experience and inexperience coming together. And I'll use Like 'Em or Not Led Zeppelin, where you had the two guys who were like the pros on the scene, John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page, then the guys from the North Country, and how that dichotomy mixes together in bands.
Sure. Yep. No, very.
I can just go on all day just name dropping for Pat because he's humble, but I know Pat Lord. So Zeppelin, he reissued one of the original guys who was going to be the Zeppelin singer, but
Terry Reid.
Terry Reid.
Yeah, Terry Reid. Which I actually didn't like that album that much, but it's.
Terry and I became pals. I've hung out with Terry a lot. Terry made this album in 1973 that I love called The River. And I actually put that out a few times, and it sold very well. And Terry lives in Southern California, and he plays concerts down there. And Terry's a masterful storyteller. Very, very funny guy. Very interesting guy.
Oh, that's cool. This is like a generic question, though, in terms of like us growing up and this, all you staying from the business. And how has it really changed now in modern day?
Well, okay. This is a
very generic.
Okay, well, this is a very excellent rant because we're running out of time here. So when we were kids, on a Saturday afternoon, like I grew up in Corning, New York, south of Rochester, there was no cable TV, right? So on Saturday afternoon, you had the 3 networks plus, let's say, PBS, not much to watch. Video games hadn't been invented. The internet hadn't been invented. So you could either play basketball or something with your buddies, which was not my thing, or listen to music, right? So music was like one of the few choices that we had as teenagers in the 70s. Now, if you're a teen, you've got 10,000 million friggin' choices, right? You've got, besides a million cable TV, you've got Netflix, you can sext and text on your phone, you can do all kinds of weird crap. And so kids are not connected to music like we were, and then, rather than buy stuff, people just stream it. Like here's an analogy I use. Let's say I woke up in 1983 and I said, oh man, I need the Beatles' White Album on vinyl. Well, in fact, that was the only version you could get at that point. So I might go to the Record Archive and I buy that. And then I see that the Rain Parade have a new album and I buy that. And then maybe I decide I need this Joni Mitchell album. So I leave the Record Archive and 3 artists made money, right? 3 record companies made money, and Dick Storms and the Record Archive made money, right? Everybody's happy. Now I wake up on a Saturday afternoon. I realize I don't have the White Album. I turn on Spotify. I listen to it for half an hour. Nobody made money. Especially
like a fraction of a cent to
fraction of a cent. So you follow what I mean?
In
other words, the best way for the music business to survive is with physical product when people buy it in the store. And those days are just kind of over,
and I said I'll bring up that quote again because I thought it was so funny about Record Store Day calling it Colored Vinyl Day.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, I have like 8,000 albums, maybe 10 of them are colored just by.
Plus the ones you spilled ketchup on or something, you count those.
Right. But I mean, this idea that you have to like loop people. I mean, if music is good, just buy the friggin' record on a piece of black vinyl. for Christ's sake.
Yeah, maybe when it's a novelty, like once every 1,000 things or something,
Exactly.
then it's fun. But now it's like everything. And like I told you, I just want the album. Okay, if it's like whatever, I don't care. I just want the album.
Okay, I'm gonna leave us with this phrase: black vinyl matters.
That's correct. I will give you like percent if I make a shirt out of that.
Yes.
That's cool.
Chaz missed it.
Yeah,
Chaz,
black vinyl matters.
Black vinyl matters, my friend.
That's
Tish tish boom.
So guys, this has been great. I miss my days in Rochester.
Yeah.
I'm glad you guys are doing this Rochester-based podcast. I'm honored.
You come back sometime?
Yes, I would love that. And we can do more of this.
Well, for now, though, we don't have a private jet to fly people into the studio yet, so please do it Zoom.
Okay, sure.
Now, we were going to ask, so we're going to play it if we can, because we will, but we won't promise, because who knows with the little gremlins. Is there something you'd like us to play, like from Dream Syndicate, Mushroom, something?
Why don't you play a Mushroom track? Go to Bandcamp, and like I said, there's a Mushroom album called Analog Hi-Fi Surprise, and just take anything off of it. There's a song called The Magic of Michael that's pretty cool. There's one called The Sounds Hold on, this is a great title. We got to get this title. 1 second here, guys.
The suspense.
Yes, the suspense. Mushroom. Okay, this is a song titled End All Song Titles. It is. Here we go. It's coming up.
Drum roll.
The evolution of smells in an underground parking garage after an all-night rave.
That's like Beefheart-esque. It's like making love to a vampire with a monkey on my knee or something.
Yes. And then there's another song title. This is one for Chaz. A Song of Remembrance for a time when wife swapping was considered politically correct.
There we go.
I wonder if that one would get demonetized these days.
Yeah, you probably get cancel culture these days for that title. But 20 years ago, I put out that title. See, these songs have no lyrics, so you can be a little more crazy than you would if you had lyrics.
Yeah, you can. I heard, I was talking to some people, doing instrumental albums, and they said, I asked them, do you have a problem with titles for your instrumentals? They're like, oh, yeah, a lot.
No, I find coming up with titles is easy for me, but maybe because I'm a writer and an author. So
probably that's it. Yeah, that's probably why.
Well, guys, this is great. I'm going to say goodbye.
Yep. We'll say goodbye. I see Chaz's rear end.
I'm multitasking, guys. I'm multitasking. This was good.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. We'll have part 2 down the line.
Okay. Bye-bye.
See ya.
See ya.
Thanks, guys.
We are the Architects of Entropy, a collaborative world-building tabletop role-playing actual play podcast. In other words, my friends and I create exciting, weird worlds and then we play in them. Join us for our introductory story as we play Dungeons and Dragons in a homebrew high fantasy world populated with dwarves, elves, fairies, and anthropomorphic weasels. What's going to happen next? We have no idea. Join us and find out. Architects of Entropy, a podcast.